You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. My guest today is Krista St-Germain. Krista is a master certified life coach, grief expert, widow, mom, and host of the Widowed Mom podcast. When her husband was killed by a drunk driver in 2016, Krista's life was completely and unexpectedly flipped upside down. After therapy helped her unfurl from the fetal position, Krista discovered life coaching, post-traumatic growth, and learned the tools she needed to move forward and create a future she could get excited about. Now she coaches and teaches other widows so that they can love life again too. So today with Krista, she shares the story of losing her husband, how she coped, and how she helps other moms do the same. We talk about emotional freedom technique tapping, grief, the grief plateau, what to say and what not to say to someone who's lost a spouse, how she helped her children grieve, and even finding love again. This is a really informative episode that I think everyone, widowed or not, should hear. All right, here's Krista. Hey, Krista, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Totally my pleasure. Happy to do it.
I'm going to jump right in with you. So,
okay, let's go.
Your husband, Hugo.
Yeah.
Take me back. Talk to me about your experience and losing him and everything that's propelled the work that you do.
Yeah. So he was like my redemption story. He was my second husband. First marriage went down in flames, and it was meant to be that way. But he was like the proof that good humans exist, like true, amazing relationships are possible. And so I was just on this real high in my life. When he died, I was 40, and we were coming home on a trip. I volunteer with an organization. We'd been on a volunteer trip, and we'd driven separately, and I had a flat tire. And so I pulled over off to the side of the interstate. We weren't that far from home, and he pulled up behind me, and he was stubborn, right? Stubborn man. He did not want to call AAA, just wanted to change the tire himself. And I did not insist. We'll just change the tire. And so he was trying to get in to the trunk of my car, trying to get access to the spare tire. We were on the shoulder of the highway, but a driver who we later found out had both meth and alcohol in his system didn't see us at all and didn't hit the brakes and just crashed into the back of his car and trapped him between his car and my car. And so, 24 hours, less than 24 hours, really, it happened late on a Sunday, and by midday Monday, he was gone. So it was just like, life is amazing, and everything I've ever wanted is possible and happening, and all of my dreams of the future. And then rug pulled out from under me. Totally didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
Life is shattered. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to just ask the first thing coming to mind. How do you talk about it now? Like, how is that experience for you? And I don't know. I imagine there are people out there who can't even do what you just did.
Yeah. Well, it took me a long time to get there, though, right? Like, that wasn't immediate. That was one of the first things that I really needed to do, was like grab my cell phone and get an appointment with my therapist and tell that story as many times as I needed to tell it to actually make it feel real.
Yeah.
And then I needed to process all of the trauma of it and be able to not feel so triggered in my body when I even thought about it. And so that was not an overnight thing. So now it feels completely different to me to talk about it than it used to.
Yeah.
I still don't. I think originally I thought that if I really wanted to love my life again, I was going to have to be happy that it happened. Not sure where I got that idea, but I kind of thought I was going to have to be some level of gratitude that is like superhuman.
Yeah.
And then I eventually realized, oh no, actually I don't have to be happy about this at all. I can still wish this hadn't happened, and I can still get back to loving my life again, right? I can still take this experience and weave it into the fabric of my life and choose how I want to respond to it, and, use that information in service of the life that I want, as opposed to letting it limit me, which in the beginning really is my like little thought in the back of my brain was, your best days are behind you. You're never going to be, that was it. Like your ship sailed.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see it that way at all anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But that was some work.
Yeah. And so how old were your kids when that happened?
So 12 and 9.
Okay. And so you went to therapy. Did your kids go to therapy?
They did a couple of times, but they didn't really seem to need it. I mean, it's so different for everyone. And they had actually, they had seen a therapist when my first husband and I got divorced. And so I called her immediately too. And they went a couple of times and, just really weren't getting much out of it, and weren't really struggling as much as they had different responses, both of them. So my son, he was the younger one. He was closer to Hugo and like spent a lot more time with him. And for him, it was the realization that people die. Right. And that was what was so troubling to him, was that if Hugo could die, then that meant mommy could die. And so he started to be very clingy, and, he would say things like, if you die, I just want to die a couple of seconds after you die, because I don't want to be without you. Right. Yeah. So so for him and I, it was a lot of heart to heart little conversations at bedtime. And, and I love tapping, emotional freedom technique. And I've been doing it for years. And I taught the kids how to do it when they were little. I would do it with them when they were going to bed, and we would just tap, like, let it go, like, whatever it was. And so we pulled those skills out again. And I think that was really helpful. And then for my daughter, it was more about, even though she wasn't as close to Hugo, she was old enough that I think she recognized the potential of what had been lost. Like, she, was so sad that he was never going to be able to teach her French, because French was his first language. And she was never going to learn how to water ski or snow ski from him. And those things that they just hadn't gotten to do yet were what she needed to grieve. And so it's a really different experience for both of them. But they were more resilient than I expected.
Yeah. And you can speak to your own experience or what you suggest now, but what are those early conversations look like, trying to talk to your kids about this? Like, what do you advise women to do? I know that's a big part of your coaching, and I'm sure maybe you draw on your own experience. And could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. One of the big things that we work on is that feelings aren't problems. And because most of us don't grow up with that, we're never taught that feelings aren't problems. We're not really taught how to allow them. Then when we have big feelings, we have all sorts of drama about, what do I do with all of these big feelings in front of my children? And so when we can realize that our feelings aren't problems, and we get some confidence around how to allow them for ourselves, then that makes us parent differently, because then we stop trying to fix our children's feelings, because we realize that they aren't broken. And because we become good at witnessing our own feelings, we become better at witnessing theirs. And so the whole dynamic of, usually what you think is, well, my kids are in pain, so I need to fix it. That's not how it works. Right. So if we can get that skill down, that realize, no, actually feelings are just, natural part of being human. And the goal isn't to get rid of them. Nothing's wrong because they're there, but the goal is just to let them flow through us. Then we can help our kids learn that same skill and witness their experience instead of trying to control it.
It's a lot easier said than done, right? I mean, like you said, the instinct is to want to take the pain away, and we just can't. Yeah,
you can't. And also, I mean, I think when you think about it even more, you would realize that as much as because we think feelings are problems, believe that we don't want to have negative emotion, it's not actually true. Like, we really do. Because if we don't have the negative emotion, the positive stuff doesn't have any context. And also, we don't want to be the lawnmower parent that removes all the obstacles for our children so that they never learn how to, be resilient and how to deal with emotions to set them up for what is the reality of being an adult on this planet.
Yeah.
It's not all roses, and we don't really want to take those valuable experiences away from them, but it's still really hard to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So getting back to maybe your experience a little bit as opposed to your kids, what are some things that are helpful to say in support of someone who just lost a partner, and some things that we should probably never say?
Yeah, there's a long list, right?
Yeah.
Not that it's I encourage everyone to give themselves grace, right? Because we're probably going to say something that later we wish we hadn't. I look back at all the things that I've said that I would now do so differently. But hey, we're all doing the best job we can do. So again, it's that feelings aren't problems. And what mostly comes out of our mouth is coming from a place where feelings are problems. So what we end up doing is saying things in attempt to make another person feel better, because we don't know how to feel okay when they don't feel okay. So we're saying things like, oh, it's okay, they're in a better place, and there's a plan, and at least they're not suffering, and don't worry, you're young, you there's other fish in the sea,
I can't even imagine hearing that.
Right. Oh my gosh, so many times.
Oh my goodness.
But people mean well, and they're just so uncomfortable with your discomfort. They're trying to make it go away. And so all the minimizing things are what not to say. Then also they're trying to, I think, often relate.
Yeah.
And so we'll say things like, oh, well, when my aunt died, I know exactly how you feel, because last year, whatever happened.
Right.
And maybe they, have experienced something really similar, but what a person doesn't really need to hear is about your experience. Right. They just want you to be there for them. And so to me, it's as simple as, I'm so sorry this happened and I love you. And it's not an effort to change. It's not an effort to minimize or make them feel better. It's just, I'm so sorry and I love you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I've read a couple of books and whatnot. I'm not very well versed, and that's why you're here, but also that, a lot of times the way that we offer support ends up giving the person you're trying to support another job to do. It's
to make you feel better.
Yeah. And it's like, asking them, what can I do? It's like, whatever that person is going through, they're just doing their best to get out of bed every morning, and they don't need to come up with something to give you to do. Just do. Yeah. If you know the person well enough, right? Like just do. Just leave the food at the door, or, I don't know. Like
I so appreciated that. Because the same thing. You don't even know what planet you're on. Yeah. Your whole world just exploded. And to be able to tell somebody what to do is really hard. I had one friend who she just appointed herself my liaison, right? Like she fielded all questions. She answered all things.
It's amazing.
She got school supplies coordinated. All of a sudden my lawn was being mowed. Like,
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to ask you, and I feel like what you just said sort of touches on that. There's so many details of a loss, especially of a partner, that I think so many of us who haven't experienced it don't even think about. It's like credit cards in their name, bills in their name, like all of those tedious things that were just happening before, and now they have to be taken care of. I mean, I don't know. Did you have anything else you want to say on that?
And every time you call to take care of one of them, someone says, I'm so sorry for your loss. And you have to say, my husband died. Yeah. Yeah. It's rough. Yeah. It's rough.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to fast forward a lot now, but now you've made this your life's work. You're a master coach. Your program Moms Go On. Take me through the transition a little bit. Like, how did you go from all of the grief and shock to this is your passion now? This is your purpose.
Yeah. I definitely didn't intend to do that. It's interesting how things unfold over time. But so initially, I just went back to my therapist, right? I had an amazing therapist, and I told the story as many times as I needed to tell it. She had actually had me pretty convinced that I should be a therapist, and to the point that I enrolled in an MFT program. Yeah. And I was waiting for it to start. And I had gotten to the point where I now refer to it as like a grief plateau, where you're kind of out of acute grief and you're functioning, and everyone around you, doesn't really know that how you look on the outside is not how you feel on the inside, which for me wasn't awful. It was just robotic. It was kind of hollow and robotic. And I still kind of believe that my best days were probably behind me. And it just so happened that as I was waiting for that MFT program to start, a coach that I had been following launched a program. It wasn't grief specific, but it made sense for me. And I decided to try it. And I had never experienced coaching before. I had never experienced the tools that she was teaching before. And in 6 months, I was just like, okay, maybe what I'll do is since being a life coach is not really something that anybody can do, right? That's not something I could do. I'll just, I'll go through the MFT program and maybe I'll get certified as a coach and I'll do that on the side. And then I kept doing my own work and I kept getting coached. And by the time it came actually time to start that MFT program, I decided, no, that's not what I want to do. I really want to be a coach. I still didn't want to coach widows at that point because I hadn't done enough of my own work and I thought it would be too sad. But I kept going with the coaching and I got certified. And then the more work I did on myself and the more I truly started to realize that feelings are not problems and they're not contagious. At a certain point, it just clicked that I thought, well, why would I do anything else? Yeah. Right. When I looked for the resources, I found crickets. Nothing felt age appropriate to me. It all felt like it was for, women who were my grandma's age. Right. No one I knew in my life had a similar life experience. I felt like a pariah and I just couldn't find a place. And what I found online was just depressing. Yeah. Right. It was a lot of, I'm years out and I still cry every day and pity parties, and it just wasn't. You could go there and feel like people understood the misery, but you weren't seeing many examples of
like, now what
you could actually do,
right?
Post-traumatic growth.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was the evolution and it took me just also changing my own thoughts about that I actually could help.
Right.
Yeah. Through who do you think you are? All that.
The imposter syndrome.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So tell me a little bit about, since you have experience with both, like, explain the difference between coaching and therapy.
Yeah. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer here that really works. I think, and I've talked to my therapist about this several times because she has some people in her office that are therapists that call themselves life coaches, right? So for some people, it's really just semantics and they might use the same tools, but under a different name. But I think it's important for people who aren't familiar with either to realize that people who are therapists have a license. Right? They have to go to school and there are specific requirements and they vary by the state, but you can't just call yourself a therapist.
Right.
Anybody can call themselves a life coach. So it has to be a little bit of buyer beware there. And I think that's important to know. What I found in my own personal experience was that I just got to a place in therapy where it wasn't actionable anymore for me. I wasn't getting tools.
Makes sense.
It was just a lot of talking. And I came to the point where I felt like I was talking about the same stuff and also being told, you're doing great. She basically said, you're doing great. Do you need me? I don't think you need me. Right. So right. I feel like for me, it was like, let's get from that place of dysfunction back to the place of functioning. And then life coaching was where I took functioning and went to growth.
Okay.
That's how I experienced it.
Okay. All right. I like that. That makes sense. I wanted to go back a minute to the grief plateau.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the part where the world starts to move on, right? Like around you. I mean, what do you want to say to people that they don't understand about that experience? Like help those of us who just see a person now functioning and strong, like help us understand that a little bit more, what that's like.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't let the cover of the book convince you of what's on the inside. Yeah. Because how you're feeling isn't often how you're acting. And then conversely, don't worry about making someone feel bad or reminding them of their loss by bringing it up. I think that's oftentimes why we don't, bring it up or ask them how they're doing, because they seem like they're doing well. And then we think, well, if I bring it up, I'll probably just remind them of this painful thing. And I don't want to do that. So I'll just not ever talk about it. as though that's helpful. But what most of us experience is that we would actually like to talk about it because we're thinking about it.
Right.
And we think that you're not thinking about it. And so it feels like the elephant in the room. And if you bring it up, then we don't feel so alone, and we get to talk about our person. It helped me a lot because Hugo and I had worked together. And so everyone at work knew him.
Yeah.
And so it was easy to bring up stories about him and talk about him and laugh about him. And that was really helpful for me. And I had enough people in my environment that they didn't steer too shy of that. And if they didn't bring it up, I would bring it up. But, you know, back to what you asked, it's okay to talk about it, and don't assume that they're okay just because they look strong.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Sometimes we're just putting on the brave face.
Yeah. And the other thing that you've said a few times is, you know, that feeling of my best days are behind me.
Yeah.
The word that I wrote down next to that is guilt. Like, that's what comes to mind. Like, is there a thought or a fear that moving on will be that you are forgetting or you are discounting the life that you had and the person? And I don't know, how do you even
for almost
through
every
that?
For almost every widow I've coached. Yeah, for sure. So we can't
how do you
win.
deal? Yeah.
Well, so how you deal is you realize that your feelings, like, so if I'm feeling happy, it's because of the thought that I'm thinking, right? It doesn't have anything to do with the death of my person. They're completely separate. Right? If I'm feeling happy now, it's because of something I'm thinking now. If I'm feeling guilty now, it's because of something I'm thinking now. And usually what I'm feeling guilty about, I'm feeling guilty because I'm thinking a thought about my own happiness. I'm making a false connection between my happiness, which I've created with my own thinking, and this relationship. And they are just not connected. But sometimes we do that without realizing it, or maybe even when we realize it, we hold on to it because even though it's painful, it's familiar, and we kind of like the connection that we feel.
It seems like that might be a sign that there's more work to do. Like there's something else we have to get to there.
Yeah.
And it's reminding me, I listened to a podcast episode about the thought, feeling, action connection. It's reminding me a lot of that and sort of putting that all together.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to say on that before I ask you another question?
Those are like the main two skills that I really want people to learn. And so that I focus so much on teaching is how to feel your feelings, how to allow them to process through you, and how to understand that thought, feeling, action connection, that if we have something happens to us and we have lots of thoughts about it, and each thought creates a different emotional experience, and emotions then drive our behaviors, and behaviors then create our lives.
And you mentioned it before, and I know that it's a big part of your platform, but can you explain post-traumatic growth?
Yeah. I remember the record scratching. I was like, what? Post-traumatic what? So post-traumatic growth is this idea is a phrase that was coined in the 90s by a couple of researchers, Tedeschi and Calhoun. And what they were kind of noticing is that some people were going through trauma and they were coming out believing that life was better after the trauma. And some people weren't. And they were really curious about that. And before their work, it was kind of thought that after trauma, the best you could hope for was a return to baseline, right? The goal was to bounce back. And then they came along and started researching it and realized, no, actually you can take any sort of traumatic life event and use it as the raw material to bounce forward. Meaning that you can experience greater satisfaction in life, not in spite of what happened, but because of it, because of what you decided to do with it. So, deeper spiritual connections, more meaningful relationships, right? Life that's more of what you want, more aligned with your values, more on purpose. Yeah. So yeah, totally. I was like, what?
Yeah.
And you don't have to have post-traumatic stress disorder to experience that either.
Right. No,
right? It's not like it has to be trauma with a capital T.
Right. Like, I'm even thinking about all of us right now with this pandemic. Right? Like so many of us are starting to come out the other side, like reevaluating our priorities and looking at our lives and slowing down. And, I think for all of us, there's an element of trauma to this pandemic period.
Yeah. But then what do we want to do with that?
Right.
How do we want to take what's happened? Because we can't control it. It's over.
Right.
How do we want to take what happened and use it to inform our present moment and our future moments? Yeah.
Okay. So your coaching program, who's coming to you? Like, what does it look like to work with you? Tell me more about Mom Goes On.
Yeah. So they're all widows and they're all moms. Age of children is irrelevant. So I have women with very little children. I have women with grown children, but they all have children. And where I'm best able to help them is when they're past the early acute grief. And I try not to put timelines on that, but it is a group coaching program. So I'm not right there holding their hand all the time. So they have to be able, the widow fog or grief fog, but I call it widow fog, is no joke for a lot of people, So for me, I really struggled in the beginning to read and remember things. I just read a paragraph. And I love to read. I couldn't read.
Wow.
I couldn't remember anything, right? I'd read it and it was just like poof, gone.
Oh my goodness.
So the widow fog has to have passed at least enough that people can watch a video that I give them and be able to complete a worksheet, right?
Okay.
And they have to be functioning enough that they're not staying in bed all day. They're not struggling with like basic hygiene, and which in the beginning, sometimes your best days are just being able to take a shower. Right. And so that's different for every person, but they have to kind of be at that back to baseline functioning. But then also it's that grief plateau place where maybe life isn't at all what they really want it to be or believe it could be, but they want it to be better. They just don't know how. Right. They're committed to figuring it out. They just need someone to give them the tools and the support and, help them get going in the right direction.
Okay, so it's group based, and you meet, I think I read, for 6 months.
Yep, it's a 6-month program.
Okay.
And we do group coaching. I love group coaching. I used to only do one-on-one coaching, and I kind of came to a point where I realized there's so much about grief and really just the human experience that we all think is unique to us. We all tend to assume there's something wrong with us, right? It's just us and we're the special snowflakes. And so I decided if I could just get all these women together and they could see that it's not them. There's nothing wrong with them. Like this is the humanness that's coming out. This is the grief that is so common. And then we could make progress faster. So it's group coaching, but what's fascinating about it is how I'll coach one person and then the next person will say, actually, I don't need coaching. Like I just got what I needed from that person. Right. Or they will feel like they got helped even when they didn't, because they will see the pattern of what's going on in this other person's life. And they will see that same pattern in their own lives and they will connect the dots. And so, so we do group coaching. There's an element of online support and community, and then tools and the application of tools. And then once people do the 6-month program, I have a lot of them that don't want to leave. And so we created a master's program. So I have some, I started the program in 2019, and I have, I think 5 of the original 9 are still, because they fall in love with it.
Yeah.
You just kind of fall in love with the
community. And I feel like, the community, I mean, the being together, the camaraderie, the relating, the bonding, I'm sure is very strong. Yeah.
Yeah. And you go on, you accomplish the thing that's in front of you. And then, you have a new idea. Okay. So, maybe now it's not so terrible, but now I want to date. Okay. Well, maybe I'd like some support around that. There's a big can of worms. So they stick around for that. Or maybe I want to change careers, or now I want to move across the country, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay. So I know that you have some feelings about grief and what is generally accepted about grief or talked about grief. Yeah. What are the myths of grief that we need to know?
Yeah. I think we should just it's a safer assumption that to just throw out what you think you know about grief and start fresh.
Okay.
I think it's important to understand that just like there are lots of theories of how to eat healthy, right? There are lots of theories about grief. But only some of them have taken hold in our popular culture. And so what we all think of is we think of the 5 stages.
Right.
That's what everybody thinks of.
Right.
And it's important to know that not only is it only one of many theories, but it was also originally based on interviews with terminally ill patients. It wasn't even about someone who lost someone. It was about going through the process of coming to terms with your own death.
Interesting.
Right? And then it's been applied.
Which is much different.
Right. And even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who, wrote on death and dying and with David Kessler created the 5 stages, and now he's created a 6th stage. But even she says, you know, her work was so misinterpreted because people try to make it this linear thing. Well, first I need to be, you know, in denial, and then I need to bargain, and then, you know, and they measure themselves against something that was never really meant to be a measurement. So it's just different for everyone. It doesn't need to be, you know, pathologized.
Right.
It is a natural response to loss. Right? All emotions are part of it. Timelines really aren't relevant. It is not linear as much as we want it to be. It is not neat and tidy. It's very messy. It's very different. And comparisons just never really help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just was picturing like a box. Like we cannot put the grief experience of everyone in one box.
Yeah, and that's what it feels like a lot of times, is that you are a square peg trying to shove yourself in a round hole.
Yeah.
You know, when you're looking at that, or other people think that you're supposed to go through all these 5 stages, and so they're like, I think this is the part where you're angry.
Oh,
or,
God.
you know, like, are you angry enough? You're just like, no, stop.
Like,
Like,
no, thank you. Yeah. Like, I'm an
right.
adult. Thanks. Got it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. I think it comes from, like you said earlier, just, I think generally most people mean well. It's just, societally, we don't allow ourselves to talk about grief. We don't allow ourselves to talk about loss. We don't.
Yes.
It's just not culturally what we do. And I think that's at a great disservice to those of us. I mean, all of us have experienced grief, and all of us have experienced loss, whether it's as close-knit of a loss as a partner or a spouse or a grandmother or, you know.
Or a non-death loss.
Yeah, right. Like we brought up the pandemic. We're all grieving the life of what could have been the last 2 years and what it's going to be, and for our kids and for ourselves. And so it seems silly to me, actually, that we don't talk about it, and we don't. I don't know. It's unfortunate. I think it does a great disservice to all of us.
Yeah, and then not talking about it, of course, is what leads to you being completely unprepared.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, even you think about like palliative care, like it's becoming more and more a thing where, you know, people have loved ones pass in the home, but even that was out of vogue for a while, right?
Yeah.
So think about how many kids have been to a memorial service, how many kids have been in a home where someone passed. That used to be common, right? Where people would die at home, and death was it was more a part of our day to day.
Yeah.
And then we kind of removed it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to sit with that a minute, because I don't know. Even preparing for this, you know, it's, I'm pretty open, and I'm pretty willing to say when I don't know something or need to know more, but it also strikes me as part of this conversation that almost like I don't even know what I don't know. You know, like I've experienced loss, but not my husband, not my partner, who I just thought was going to be there forever. And it's, I don't know.
I think that's a great place to be, though, right? Is the awareness that you know what you know, and there's more to it than that. Like, it's such a healthy place to be.
Yeah. So, all right. So in coaching these women, in having a conversation like this, how do you protect yourself? Like, how do you take care of yourself and nurture yourself and just keep yourself from, I don't know if you can keep yourself from being triggered. We were talking about how emotions are not problems, but, you know, so you're not falling back in a hole every time you talk about it or coach someone.
Yeah. So, you know, therapists need therapists, coaches need coaches, you know, so for sure I continue to do my own work, but also I really genuinely believe that where my clients are is where they're supposed to be, and that what's happening is supposed to be happening, not in a everything happens for a reason kind of way. I don't mean it to be cliche, but like it's all unfolding for them, and I'm just there to support them in that. And so it's totally okay for them to feel however they feel. It's not a problem. It's not contagious. I'm not going to soak up their energy. And even if I did, I know how to allow energy to flow through me. I don't really believe that's how it works, but It's just an honor and a privilege. And very rarely, because I think I have learned the art of coaching in the way that I do it, it doesn't feel like an emotional burden to me.
Okay.
It feels like a privilege. And
it's not
so
like seeping into your
not at
soul.
All. Not at all. And at the end of a coaching session, I'm usually more energized than I was before. So yeah, it's just not something, but I also have lots of other ways of taking care of myself. It's just that I don't really believe that I have to shelter myself or protect myself from what's going on with the women that I'm working with.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And that is something I talk about a lot on the show is, the idea of self-care and just as women and moms, how to take care of ourselves. So do you have anything specific in that regard that you would want to share that you do personally to self-care or just take care of yourself outside of the realm of coaching?
Well, I think I take the skills that I teach in coaching and I apply them to my own life, right? Okay. So letting myself feel my emotions, right? Allowing things to because, when I came to this work, I didn't really understand anything but what most of us know, which is how to avoid our feelings, how to resist them, how to, react to them. And so just giving myself the time and space to process whatever it is that I'm feeling is, to me, self-care. Tapping for me is the highest form of that. It is what I find to be the most loving, gentle way of letting something flow through me. So I do a lot of that. And then also I think self-care is not believing the stories in your brain.
Yeah.
Right? Like developing a healthy skepticism for the nonsense that we
There's a lot of it.
Time. There's a lot of nonsense in there. Yeah. And so just taking time to coach myself and separate out what actually do I want to believe compared to what my brain might be offering me on repeat. And so that to me is self-care. And then just anything that lights me up, which can vary from time to time. I love doing puzzles.
Okay.
It's like a random thing. I like reading. I like, certain shows on Netflix. I like playing with my dog,
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the tapping? I'm not so familiar with this and what it means. And
it's very weird when you first get exposed to it. So I always like to tell people that's totally okay if you think it's weird, but basically it's a way of telling your amygdala, the part of your brain that controls fight, flight, or freeze, to calm down. Calm down, amygdala, we're safe. And as you tap, you're tapping on different acupressure points of your body. And as you're tapping, research shows that your cortisol levels drop, which is a stress hormone. So basically what you do, it's very simple, and you can just go to YouTube if you want, and there's tons of tutorial videos. Or I like this app called the Tapping Solution. It's now there's only a 14-day free trial now, and then you have to pay for it. But it's still a great app in terms of teaching you how to tap. But you start on the side of your hand, which they used to call the karate chop point, but it's kind of, there's side of hand is a better way to say that.
Okay.
But side of hand, and you set yourself up with 3 repetitive statements. So you come up with a problem statement. So I feel overwhelmed, right? That could be a problem statement. I feel overwhelmed. And so it's even though I feel overwhelmed, and then you follow that with a statement that feels true to you and safe to you, right? So even though I feel overwhelmed, I completely love and accept myself. Right? Even though I feel overwhelmed, this is the truth of how I feel. Even though I feel overwhelmed, it's okay for me to feel this way. I accept myself and all my feelings. It can be different for each person, right? So you say the problem statement followed by the grounding statement, and then you just tap through the points. And I like to tap eyebrow first. It's called, right here. It's really not your eyebrow, but it's kind of between your nose and your eyebrow. And then side of your eye, under the eye, kind of on that bone, under the nose, under the lip, collarbone, under the arm, and top of the head. And you tap 8 to 9 times-ish on each point. And as you do it, you just say your problem statement. All this overwhelm, right? Side of the eye, all this overwhelm. Under the eye, all this overwhelm. And really all you're doing is creating safety in your nervous system and allowing whatever it is to flow through you. And it's beautiful. And depending on how you use it, right, you could just use it to lower the intensity of an emotion and let it flow through you. You can also use it to create safety in your nervous system and go back and process traumatic events, which I don't advise doing on your own. I think you want to do that with someone who is a practitioner. but where you're allowing yourself to remember something as you're experiencing safety.
And you initially learned this in therapy?
Actually, no. I initially learned it. Jack Canfield wrote a book on it a long time ago, and I think he was probably my first exposure to it. And yeah, then I've followed the Ortners and all of their books, and then Dawson Church and all of his work. So yeah, no therapy. I never learned it in therapy.
Oh, interesting.
There are a lot of therapists now that are doing it.
Yeah, because I'm familiar with the term, but I've not had anyone on the show yet who does that as part of their practice, or maybe we just didn't get to it in conversation.
Yeah.
But
no, I love it. I teach it to my clients, and I actually bring in someone who specializes in it and have her do two group coaching calls a month where we it's called borrowing benefits. There's research that shows that it's like a mirror neuron thing, where even if you're watching someone else tap with a practitioner on their own issue, and you have named your own issue, even though you aren't necessarily thinking about your own issue, there's actually benefit in just going through the process as someone else taps through theirs, and you'll notice shifts in your own issue. It's fascinating to me.
Interesting. Yes, that is fascinating. And I think it's speaking also to the benefits of being in a group, right? Like we're experiencing it together and benefiting from each other's experiences and stories, right?
Yeah, I love it. Because widowhood especially is just super isolating, right? When you are a youngish widow.
Yes.
Right? Because most of us, we just feel like we're on islands by ourselves.
Yeah. So you mentioned that earlier too, just that you didn't find resources. Why do you think that is? And do you think that's changing?
I do think it's changing. It's super fun for me to watch women who have worked with me fall in love with grief work and coaching and then go study it, right? And then start their own similar work. And I'm seeing that a lot happen just even the last couple of years with my own clients. Also, it's just not something that's taught.
Yeah.
Right? So one of my clients is, she's a psychologist and she has a doctorate. She's never taught hardly anything about grief in all of that work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, I think too, especially being, like you said, a young widow, it's like maybe this isn't everyone's experience, but in my brain, it's just like, that's not something that happens to me. That's, there's certain things like that in life that we sort of just go through like, well, that doesn't happen to me. That doesn't happen to my family. And then it does. And
it's going to happen to all of us eventually, whether we're the ones that die or somebody else does. Like, we're not getting out alive,
Right.
I mean, but yeah, we do seem to think we're invincible and it only happens to other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's also why we are so awkward around it, because if it's not normalized within us, then of course that's like our worst nightmare. So then when it happens to someone we love, we don't want, because then it brings up our own worst fear and it's right there in front of us. And who wants to look at that?
Yeah. 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 And I know you work mostly or all with moms and people who identify as women and moms. Do you have any experience or any thoughts on how men and women cope differently with grief and with the loss of a partner?
What's the word? Speculative, because I really haven't coached a lot of men, but just kind of watching, I do pay attention to, stories. And so it's anecdotal, I guess is the right word, in a lot of groups that I'm in. Men seem to date a lot faster after losing a spouse. And I think there's a few reasons for that, but yeah, they will, and statistics show that men date sooner and get remarried sooner than women. Different approaches, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
I do. And
I can leave it at that.
I do see some of the same patterns in terms of coping mechanisms that can be unhealthy. Right. And I think, some of the ones that men seem to struggle with, women struggle a little bit less. So like a little more pornography use in men than women. Okay. And that's, again, anecdotal, but just kind of what I've seen.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Any go-to advice for dating again?
and don't beat yourself up over it. So it's totally okay to date. It's totally okay to not. It's totally okay to start dating and then stop dating. It doesn't mean anything about you. You might not know if you're really ready until you try. Right?
Yeah.
And I see a lot of that. Oh, I guess I'm not doing well in my grief because now I don't want to date anymore, or I'm, judging myself for wanting to date too soon, or telling myself I should be dating already. Yeah, that's a whole bucket of.
It's a lot.
That's a whole conversation we could have.
Yeah.
Of dating in and of itself. I waited for several years, but
Yeah.
you got to do what works for you. For me, it felt like work. I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I was happy. It's a much easier experience when you get yourself to a place where you realize that you really do have everything you need and you're whole and complete. And then dating can become about adventure and about the opportunity to give love, and you can hold it a lot more lightly than when you are believing the lie that you have a hole, and that there's a missing piece and you need to find it, or that you can't be happy. And I think as women, we're unfortunately socialized to believe that, right? That it's like the best day in a woman's life is her wedding day. And, women who are single and older, if they're not widowed, are kind of considered damaged goods. I think that's changing,
right.
But I think it still exists. And so a lot of us have internalized this idea that in order to be truly happy, we need to be partnered. And it's just not true.
Yeah.
At all. In fact, some data shows that it's the opposite. But
that being said, have you repartnered? I
have repartnered.
You have?
Yeah, the craziest thing. I decided not to date forever. And then I decided, okay, I'll try it. And I met one person and he's stuck. So
can't get rid of him.
I know. Pre-COVID, we kind of started dating before COVID and then went into a COVID bubble and just never came out.
Nice.
So yeah, we're still together.
How, and if you don't mind me asking, how is that experience for him and you, like, managing this dynamic in what you do? Does it feel like Hugo's always kind of there? Like, how does that feel and work and look and all of that?
Yeah, I actually intended to do a podcast episode on this. And at one point I had him write down all of his thoughts and what he would tell anyone who was dating a widow. I think he had a leg up a little bit because at the time we started dating, I already had the Widowed Mom podcast. And so he actually went and listened. And so which is, creepy and totally fine all at the same time.
Or just like totally smart.
Totally smart, right?
Right?
So he
Yeah.
kind of knew what he was getting into and knew what I taught. And so I don't know that my experience has been typical.
Okay.
But, Hugo will always be a part of my life. I didn't ask for him. It's not like a divorce I asked for.
Right.
Right. And so to be able to have pictures of him around and to be able to talk about him and tell stories and, talk about him with my kids, that matters to me. And so he's done a really good job of knowing that matters and asking me questions and like letting me have that space.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, thank you for sharing. I mean, to get too deep on you, but
no, I'm an open book.
And you mentioned the podcast. I listened to a few episodes and, but I scanned all of the titles and I'm having trouble finding the right word, but I just found, like, with scrolling through, I was like, oh, that's so good. Oh, that's so good. Oh, that's so good. Like, things like how to handle Father's Day, awkward conversations about death, like just really getting specific and relevant. I think that even if you're not a widow, you can benefit from listening to these stories and this information, because
that's my hope.
This is the whole point, right? We all have to start to be more empathetic and understanding and know that our experience is not the only one out there.
Yeah, exactly. I did one episode, which I always like to recommend, called For Those Who Love Us.
Okay.
And I think it's really good if there's someone in your life who's had a loss, or you want to prepare yourself to deal with supporting someone through a loss, that's a really good episode.
Okay.
Because it,
yeah, no, it's
we aren't prepared usually.
Yeah. Yeah. I've shared this briefly on the show before, but, my sister-in-law passed away a few years ago and it was unexpected, and, left 2 kids behind and my brother-in-law, and our whole family just, it was a shock. And you're sitting there like, what do I do? Like, how do I help? How do I not? You don't want to step on toes. You don't want to push too much. You don't want to not be there. And I was really, hearing you about, now that it's been 3 years, we're to my brother-in-law, to her kids, she's still who she is, like it's just tricky. And you do have that feeling of not wanting to bring it up and not wanting, but it's hard. I'm going to go listen to that episode.
I hear you.
It's hard,
It is hard.
because you're also, it's not the same as theirs, but I also had to work through my own, grief, and my immediate response was do, it was like, and my husband even said to me, he's like, you're going to burn yourself out. Like, we had a 1-year-old at the time, and he was like, I need you to also remember to take care of yourself. And, it's not feasible for us to be there every weekend, like, as much as you want to. And, it's just been I don't know. It's a roller coaster of feelings, and it feels very much like we each have our own feelings and we don't often bring them together. So, and yeah, I don't know. I'm not asking you to solve our family dynamic, and I don't actually wish to talk about it much more specifically than that because it's not fully mine to share, but it's tough. It's really all I can say about it. It's tough. And you know what it is? It's intimidating. I've been intimidated by it, especially with the kids, like there's kind of those, they were tweens and now teens, and they're intimidating to begin with. But
is it intimidating you because you think you're going to do it wrong, or there's a right way to do it? What's intimidating for you?
I think initially I had to accept and give myself permission to feel it fully and have that be okay, because I had this feeling of, how can you be this broken up over this? She wasn't your mom. She wasn't your wife. You've known her. Right. Like I wasn't justified in feeling as upset as I was.
Yeah.
I still am sometimes, but in those initial months, I felt I didn't want to come across as, who are you to feel like this? This was our mom. This was my wife, and I don't know. I still feel that way a little bit. And I think too, just, I've never really been around, kids that age really, so that was a little, not really knowing how to approach them and how to talk to them that wasn't overwhelming or scary or, that would push them away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how we do this pain comparison thing.
Yeah, we do, right? Okay, we do that because I totally
do it.
I totally did it. Like, and this, my sister-in-law, she and my brother-in-law had been together since they were in high school. So she was very much a part of my husband's family for a long, long time. And so even more so made me feel like I didn't have a right to be as upset because I only knew her for, a little less than a decade and not 4 decades or whatever it was. It was like, comparing.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, as though we have to earn it somehow by our relationship with them or proximity to them or amount of time we've known them or.
Yes. And you know what it's making me think too, because I actually just had this thought earlier today. This is just tragic. A sibling of someone that I grew up with, he's 36. He just passed away from COVID and complications from COVID. And I just heard today. And this was not a person that I spent time with and that I was close with. He's like through town. I knew him. But it was upsetting. It was upsetting to hear about. And I just had the thought to myself, like, why are you upset about this? Like, you didn't know this person. And my next thought was, you're just a person who deeply feels these things. Be done with it. Like, just, that's just who you are. You don't have to know them very well. You don't have to anything. Just, you deeply feel in these situations. And the next sentence is, that's okay. And I'm getting there.
Yeah, and that's like self-care, right?
Yeah.
Like the truth is I feel sad. The truth is I am upset.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean anything about me, and I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm totally allowed to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was like, okay, do I go to the services? Do I this? And I'm like, anyone who's at those services is going to look and be like, oh, she's here? Why is she here?
Mm-hmm.
And it's...
Yeah, then we worry about other people's opinions.
Right, like, it's really...
Yeah, I see a lot of that. It's what you're saying is so common.
Yeah. And meanwhile, anyone there isn't going to be thinking about me.
Probably not.
They're not worried about me.
Yeah. But when we're just projecting that onto other people, right? Then when we aren't giving ourselves permission to feel how we feel, then of course we're going to be worried that other people won't think our feelings are valid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't have anything to do with them. It's all about us giving ourselves permission. Yeah. I see that a lot too, especially when widows have had, challenging marriages. Like maybe it wasn't going well, or like, I have one client right now who, she and her husband had decided to get a divorce, and 5 days after he moved out, he died by suicide.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh.
Right. And so, then there was that toggle back and forth with her of, I wasn't technically going to be his wife anymore. How sad do I get to be? Should I be sad? Like just all of that, giving herself permission to feel what was actually already in her body.
Right.
If it's already in our body, self-care is allowance. Doesn't matter how it got there.
Right.
It's there.
Right. And it's like, by whose standards? Right? Like this just like mythical, right? This just like this intangible fake set of rules, right? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. All right. Well, Krista, is there anything that I had written down, and I feel like you might have spoken a lot to this already, but I'll ask you again, just in case. To those of us who don't understand what it's like to lose a spouse. And I'm going to ask you to talk to those of us who don't understand and talk to the people, to someone listening who does. To each, what's one big takeaway? What's one piece of advice or word of wisdom that you would want to leave us with?
For how to support someone?
Yeah, like I just feel like given how much we've talked about, that these conversations aren't had enough, and like I don't know, like is there something that those of us that can't fully relate would be surprised to know, or that we should know that we don't? I don't know.
Sometimes I think we know it intellectually, but we don't know it. And so I don't think it can ever be said enough that feelings are not problems. They are just experiences to be allowed.
Yeah. Okay.
Your feelings aren't problems. Their feelings aren't problems. They didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong, right? There's no feelings police. Like part of being human, and what makes being human meaningful and rich is our ability to feel. Yeah. Right. And that means all of it. Right. So we go having a positive emotion and we tell ourselves, good. And then we have a negative one and we tell ourselves, this shouldn't be happening. No. Right. Right. If none of it is a problem, it's all supposed to be there. And that includes grief is all of that. It's not just the negative. It's being able to make space for all the good stuff too. Yeah. Yeah. All right. And someone listening that has lost a partner, you would tell them the same thing? Or is there anything different that you would say to that person? Yeah, I would tell them you're going to be okay. I know it feels like you're not going to be okay, and I know you can't imagine that you're going to be okay, but you're going to be okay. And it's totally okay if you don't know how that's going to happen. You are going to be okay, right? And And that's that strange thing that we kind of got to zoom out and like take the 30,000 foot view and go, I know it doesn't feel like this should be happening in my life, but this is what happens in human lives. Right. And it's okay that simultaneously everything is not okay with me.
Yeah.
And that's part of the greater human experience. Right. So you're going to be okay. I did an episode of the podcast called New Widows Start Here, you know, and that's that too. It's just that kind of basic primer.
Okay. All right. Well, Krista, thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I know everyone listening will too. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, you bet. And I don't know when this will air, but probably within the next week or two, I'm putting a free course on my website.
Okay.
Just for anybody. You don't have to be a widowed mom, but just for anybody who wants to kind of just get the basics of grief.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will. I'm going to link the couple of episodes that specifically that you shared in the show notes, and and I will look at my schedule and potentially link the course as well.
Who knows? And it'll be there if it's not linked.
Okay. All right. Well, Krista, thank you again.
My pleasure.
So first of all, thank you so much to Krista for her honesty, vulnerability, and strength throughout this conversation. You know, you can hear it in her voice, and then of course by the context of her words, that she really has done the work. She has done the tough personal development work, as we know, that was ignited by a need from a tragedy. And now using what she's learned to help other women and moms who unfortunately also experience such a tragedy is really inspiring and really beautiful. And I think it's worth saying again what Krista mentioned on the show about a lack of age-appropriate resources. I think many of us have a tendency to hear the word widow and picture an elderly woman, but as we know, that was not Krista's story. And it's not the story for, unfortunately, probably more women than we realize. You know, my brain is going to military spouses of first responders. And while there probably are a fair amount of resources for widows in those situations, you know, Krista is definitely filling a much needed gap. And the other thing I really appreciate about Krista and her work is that her coping strategies and mindset practices are digestible and doable. We talked about the thought, feeling, action connection, the idea that feelings aren't problems. And if you check out her podcast, you will see that she covers it all. You know, she has a way of breaking down every aspect of this tough conversation that make them feel very approachable. And that's what I'm doing here. I want really tough topics, particularly around mental health, to feel approachable, to be normalized, to have a place in mainstream conversation. So thank you, Krista, for all that you're doing. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.